Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard podcast. On this episode, just going to be doing a quick analysis of the ultimate draft that was held on TNT Saturday afternoon. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe for weekly content. Also, the podcasts are now up on Spotify, so you can listen to the full episode uninterrupted there. And if there's a spot you agree with, disagree with, either reach out to us on Twitter or in that comment section, and we'd love to discuss with you. So Saturday afternoon before All-Star Saturday night, where we get all the skills contests and whatnot, they brought back the ultimate draft, which is something they did in the early 2010s. I want to say, I feel like it was about a decade ago that they did it. And basically they have a bunch of former NBA players, or in this case, they had Quavo and Sue Bird and DL Hewley and a couple of reporters as fake GMs of a fake team. And they do like a fantasy type style draft in a snake order and just take the best players of all time. That was what they did for the last one. This one, they had a little bit of a modification on it where it was the pool of players was all players from the all of NBA 75 team. And then just to make sure everyone had the same amount of players based on the amount of teams that they had, they added 4 wild card slots that you could take at any time. But if somebody used a wild card slot or used all 4 before you got a chance to take a wild card player, that means you didn't get to select one. And just production value wise, from the last time they did this, they've really stepped it up. It was taken a lot more seriously this time. It was the last one was a lot of fun. There was a lot more joking around. It was pretty lighthearted. But this one was a lot more serious. And there were a couple still really funny moments throughout here. Dominique Wilkins took himself in the draft, and just kind of a funny nugget here. Michael Jordan went 3rd here again. He went 3rd in the 84 draft, 3rd the last time they did this, and then 3rd again here. Magic and Larry Bird both fell to the 2nd round. Clyde Drexler, who was picked in the 3rd round by Kenny Smith, and Charles Barkley's reaction to that pick was just hysterical. He basically just ignored him, and Ernie Johnson was trying to pry a response out of Charles, like, how did you feel about that pick, Charles? And he was just ignoring everyone. He was so mad. Rodman was a 4th round selection, and that sounds sort of crazy when you think about it in terms of an all-time draft. But as far as a team building perspective on this, if you're taking it more seriously from like a team building perspective, you got to think about this in terms of like, how many guys are you going to have on this team that really want to take a lot of shots and have the ball a lot? So to draft a guy like Rodman, who is really versatile on defense, can pretty much guard any position, and then on the flip side, all he really wants to do is rebound and play defense, doesn't really want to shoot the ball or have any need to shoot the ball, there's some value in that. So I really wasn't too mad about that selection in the 4th round from Quavo. But the funniest part by far for me was Jerry West at the very end, just lambasting everyone. And he kind of seemed to point the finger at Ernie Johnson, even though I'm sure he had nothing to do with the rules for this thing. But he was mad that he didn't get to select Draymond Green with a wild card pick because the wild card picks were already off the board. And he was just really letting them have it over that. And then scoring wise, how they determined the winner. So last time, I believe they did like a Twitter poll or had the fans vote. It was something like that, where the fans voted on who won the competition or who had the best team, whose team would win in like a tournament style scenario or something like that. But in this case, they actually had analytics determine it, and they didn't really get into the specifics on how the calculation or the algorithm was made and what was valued or how it valued certain players. They didn't really get into any of that. But there was a bit more scientific this time, I would say, than to just have it basically be a popularity contest. So I kind of like that, but I would have liked to have known a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of that algorithm. But maybe I'm just a nerd that way. I don't know. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the contestants here, Dominique Wilkins, Jerry West, Shams Charania, Chris Haynes were a team, those two together. Sue Bird was a team, the Inside the NBA group with Charles Barkley, Shaq, and Kenny. That was a team. And then they had the NBA TNT Tuesday crew. I can't remember the host of that show's name, but it was also Candace Parker and Dwayne Wade were along with him for a team. And then you had Quavo as a team, and DL Hewley, who is a comedian that I'm not familiar with. He was also a team. And that was the order that they picked in. For those on YouTube, I'll throw up like the draft summary, or at least like who had who on each team. But for the folks on Spotify, I encourage you to just look it up rather than to hear me just rattle it off real quick. And nobody, I doubt anyone's taking notes on this, so it won't really be too helpful. But before they announced the results, I made some predictions. I paused my YouTube TV broadcast of it and just wrote down who I thought would be the top three and the bottom three and in what order. Didn't really care as much about the middle, but I had the NBA Tuesday crew as the number one team. Jerry West is number one. I'm sorry, is number two. And then the Shams Sarania team and Chris Haynes as the number three group. Bottom three, I had Sue Bird in last, DL Hewley in second to last, and the inside the NBA crew in third to last. And how the results actually played out, I was pretty much spot on. I was one spot off on the top three, but I nailed the bottom three. So how the scoring actually went is the NBA Tuesday crew one, Jerry West second, Dominique Wilkins three, according to Sources Group, which was the Chris Haynes and Shams team. They were fourth, Quavo fifth, inside the NBA sixth, DL Hewley seventh, and Sue Bird last. So really close there on the predictions. I was kind of proud of myself for that. And in general, like for this weekend, I've done really well with my predictions. So to kind of give some analysis on the teams, if you're looking at the rosters that everyone put together, I'll kind of go through in reverse order. So start with the last place team and kind of explain why they got last, why they didn't do as well. Sue Bird's team, they didn't have a defensive center. And for today's league, the way she constructed this team would have been totally fine. But going up against guys like Shaq, Wilt, Kareem, Hakeem Olajuwon, particularly with Shaq and Wilt Chamberlain, that just wouldn't work. Kevin Garnett and Anthony Davis were like her primary post defenders, I would say, just based on what she has on the roster. I guess you have Nikola Jokic, and he's a good defensive player now. But as far as holding up against the physicality of a Shaquille O'Neal or Wilt Chamberlain, like they would just get eaten alive inside, particularly with Anthony Davis looking like the Tin Man lately, or the Glass Man rather. I just don't think that would work. Offensively though, and obviously on the fast break, I think this is probably the best team. I mean, just having playmakers like LeBron, Nash, Jokic, Pistol Pete, Larry Bird, that's just by far the best passing group. And then with targets to throw to like James Worthy, Garnett, and Anthony Davis, that would be really tough to deal with offensively, but just no real low post defense in terms of like a traditional post up player. It would be tough against the physically imposing bigs that you're having to go up against in this scenario. The second to last was DL Hewley's team. He just didn't have any wing defenders. I mean, he has Tracy McGrady, and from what I remember, he was an okay defensive player. I mean, just his size makes him fairly decent, but him being the sole wing defender here, it would be really tough. It would be really tough for them going up against some all-time greats. Low post scoring wise and defensively, though, this team, with the exception of the wing, this team would be a nightmare. Having dual anchors of Hakeem Olajuwon and Tim Duncan, and then scoring wise, you're also adding McHale and Dirk Nowitzki, Bill Walton. Like that would be really tough to deal with. Front court wise, this was the best team. And Jerry Lucas, I don't know a ton about him since he was way before my time. He was the last pick for DL Hewley. I know he was a power forward. He could hit some mid-range stuff and had some really crazy rebounding nights. So that would have been a really tough team to deal with front court wise. And then Jason Kidd and Gary Payton as your backcourt, even defensively, that would be really special. And then playmaking wise, Kidd, Payton, Bill Walton, that's really good. The inside the NBA crew was third to last, and they had a fairly decent draft, except I think taking Dwayne Wade in the second round, particularly with the third pick in the second round, I think that was a bit of a stretch. They probably could have waited on him to the third round, maybe even the fourth round to get him. But the real killer for them, was Clyde Drexler in the third round. That's just absurd. He was a really good player, but not that good. And despite having a really pretty solid draft outside of those two picks, missing on two of your first three picks, or it's hard to say missing in an all-time great draft, but reaching for a couple of guys with two of your first three picks that are players. So obviously they're getting some good production there from him, and just a solid team overall. I mean, they have Cowens and Reggie Miller, Nate Archibald, Wes Unseld, Isaiah Thomas. It's a good team, but just not as good as the other teams. And they really squandered at the top half of this draft. They really didn't do as good of a job as they could have. Even Cowens in the fifth round was a bit of a reach for, especially in the All NBA 75. It's really big man heavy, so you can get good big men like Cowens later on. solid big men. But I don't begrudge them for taking Kareem first round. If you're going to get one of those all-time type centers, I think it's fine to take them in the first round. But just for center depth, you can wait till the back half of the draft to get that, rather than using like a starting player type pick on it. Let's see here. Quavo's team, I don't know that they would win that much in this scenario. They have Steph Curry, Allen Iverson as the backcourt, Russell Westbrook to kind of round out the backcourt, Rodman and Giannis as the low post guys, and then you've got Dr. J, George Gervin as your wing threats. Yeah, I don't know that they'd win a lot of games, but I think this was the most fun team by far. And Quavo's goal for the draft was to draft the swaggiest team, like the most flashy team, the most fun team. So I think in terms of his goals for the draft, well, since they weren't winning, I think he accomplished his goals more than any of the other teams, even the inside the NBA or Tuesday crew who ended up winning the whole thing. I still don't think they accomplished their goals quite to the level that Quavo did. So good on him. And this would be a blast of a team to watch. I mean, just a lot of fun. The Shams team, the Shams Sarania team, according to Sources Group, I think they should have been the runaway favorite based on their top 4 picks in particular. They really nailed the top half of the draft, but they really fell apart towards the end. Outside of Bill Russell, if you're looking at this team, they really don't have any low post defense. I know Bill Russell is one of the greatest defenders of all time, but he's really all they've got. And they have Chris Bosh, who I know holds up okay on centers, but that was in an era that was pretty devoid of any center talent. And if you're asking him, even in a backup role, so he backup wise, even if he's only playing against backup centers in this draft, you're playing against guys like David Robinson, Patrick Ewing, Dave Cowens, I mentioned, Robert Parrish. Like, he's going to get eaten alive in that scenario. He's really better suited as like a secondary big man for something like this, a guy who can stretch the floor for your main low post threat. And to have Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Bill Russell, Kawhi Leonard as your first 4 picks, like, they nailed it. When they were drafting, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're going to run away with this thing. And even Ray Allen as your 5th pick to kind of stretch the floor for this group, that would have really been good for them if they had actually, obviously this is all fake, but if they're actually playing the games like that, that's a really good fit. But the mistake that killed them is they took Damian Lillard instead of David Robinson, who was the next pick. If they end up taking Robinson instead of Lillard, I think they run away with this thing because that solves all their problems as far as backup post play goes. Next up in 3rd place with Dominique Wilkins, I mentioned he took himself first. Likely what cost him the competition. It was a really funny moment either way. He said he was just wanting to make sure that he got drafted, but since all of the all NBA 75 guys got drafted, there was no way he wasn't getting picked. But he did a really decent job of kind of building a team around himself. A Harden and Oscar Robertson backcourt would have been really cool to see. And then you got a big man trio of Moses Malone, Karl Malone, Patrick Ewing. That would have been downright nasty scoring wise. And really defensively, both Malone and Ewing also too can play alongside Moses, at least in this context, due to their ability to shoot the mid-range shot really effectively. So for something like this, where you're going to be playing a lot of teams with twin towers and some of these centers aren't as mobile, I think having guys like Ewing and Malone to stretch the floor a little bit would really help out. Jerry West team, 2nd place. I thought he had the most complete team in the draft, maybe not the best, but definitely the most complete from a roster construction standpoint. Wilt Chamberlain and David Robinson, 2 of the most athletic centers in the history of the league. To get both of them on your team is really crazy. That's not even mentioning Nate Thurmond, who I don't really know a lot about, but I know he was the first player ever to record a quadruple double. And then you've also got another player on your roster who has done that in David Robinson. And then you're adding Charles Barkley to those big guys. You're going to be pretty much controlling the glass no matter what anybody else has out there on the floor. Wings of Kobe, John Havlicek, Elgin Baylor, and then you're pairing that with the all-time assist leader and all-time steals leader in John Stockton, where he's just able to feed everyone. It isn't relied on at all for scoring. That's just a really good team. But I think the one thing that sealed their fate, they don't have a backup point guard. They don't have anybody who can run the point in the backup. I guess you could have Kobe do it or Elgin Baylor maybe, but I think that would be really tough, especially in this all-time draft context. But really solid team overall. The best team, though, the team that would win this, both by the analytics and my own analysis here, was the Tuesday crew. And if you think about this team in terms of the context of the Dwight Howard Orlando group. Like, this team really starts to look scary. So in for the Dwight Howard slot for the way that Orlando offense was run, you've got Shaquille O'Neal, far and away a much better offensive player. Maybe not the defensive player that Dwight Howard is, but still, at least in his prime, Shaq was a very good defensive player, to great, I would say. And then instead of Rashard Lewis, you've got Kevin Durant in that slot. Like, that would just be nuts. Then you've got, for point guards, instead of Jameer Nelson, who was really good for them, but nowhere near the level of player that you're getting out of Jerry West, Bob Cousy, and Chris Paul. Three of the greatest distributors and excellent scoring sources for your offense. And then particularly with West and Chris Paul, they were nasty on defense, just outright nasty. Chris Paul still is pretty nasty on defense, not like he was in his prime. And then you're adding to that, you've got Scottie Pippen and Klay Thompson as your wings defensively. And then they don't really need the ball a whole lot. Pippen's able to do some creation stuff, but Klay Thompson doesn't need to handle the ball at all. He's just going to spread the floor out for Shaq and best player more than this group. They really did a great job capitalizing on their best player in Shaq in their first pick. They really built a team around him with the centerpiece. They weren't just grabbing good players as a lot of the other teams were doing. So that might be why the analytics favored them. That's certainly why I favored them. I looked at this in terms of, like, how would a team like this actually play? And for me, the Tuesday crew, the NBA TNT crew, it just made the most sense from a roster construction standpoint.